I arrived at the hospital at 4:47 in the afternoon. Not late, by my calculation. The cardiology department's registration window closed at 5, which gave me 13 minutes, which was enough. I had driven from work in the usual traffic, parked in the structure on the north side of the building, taken the elevator to the third floor. I had done this route before. I knew the distance from the elevator to the registration window, and I knew the window, and I knew the nurse behind it by sight, if not by name. The appointment had been on my calendar for 3 weeks. A follow-up echocardiogram review, the kind of appointment that sounds technical and important and is, for someone who has been managing a cardiac condition for 2 years, actually quite routine. You sit in a chair, a doctor looks at images of your heart, tells you the numbers, asks a few questions, adjusts medication if needed, schedules the next check. 45 minutes, total. I had done it 4 times before. I was not worried about this appointment. I approached the registration window at 4:51. The nurse behind the glass looked up. She looked at the clock on the wall. She looked back at me with the specific expression of a person who has been managing the end of a shift and has mentally concluded the work portion of the day. She slid the registration window shut. Not gently. The sound of it carried. "No registration," she said, her voice partially muffled by the glass, but fully audible. "Cutoff is 4:30. Get out of the line." The waiting area held perhaps 15 people, patients in various stages of their own appointments, family members, a couple of people near the window who had been behind me in what passed for a line. All of them were watching. She pointed at the door behind me. I stood at that window. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not knock on the glass or ask to speak to someone senior or invoke the appointment confirmation I had on my phone. I stood with my bag on my shoulder and my jacket still on from the walk from the parking structure, and I looked at the closed window, and I said nothing at all. Something told me to stay. I do not have a better explanation than that. Some combination of the drive I had just made, and the parking fee I had already paid, and the 40 minutes I had set aside in my afternoon, and the 2 years I had been managing something in my chest that required this kind of regular attention. Some combination of all of that settled me where I was, and I stood at the closed window and I waited. 14 seconds later, I heard footsteps in the hallway behind the registration area. Not walking. Running. The door beside the registration window burst open. Dr. James Webb, who had been my cardiologist for 22 months, who had reviewed my first echocardiogram and explained to me in plain language what it showed and what we would do about it, came through that door at a speed I had never seen him move before. He looked at the waiting area. He looked at me. He froze. For 3 full seconds, he did not speak. His face moved through something. I can only describe it as the rapid processing of a situation that had just resolved in a way he had not known to expect. Then he turned to the nurse. What he said to her left her hands shaking before he had finished the second sentence. Before I tell you what he said, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. Now let's begin. My name is Sandra Reeves. I am 41 years old. And for 2 years before that afternoon, I had been living with something I had not expected to find in my chest at 39. It had started as what I initially dismissed as stress, a racing quality to my heartbeat that appeared without warning, at rest for no reason I could identify. I had a demanding job and an active life, and I had been telling myself for months that stress was the explanation for any physical symptom I had not yet investigated. My primary care physician took it seriously before I did. She listened to my heart for longer than the usual brief check, wrote a referral, and said, "Go see this person." The person was Dr. James Webb. He was methodical and calm, and spoke to me in a way that was simultaneously very technical and entirely accessible, a skill I have come to believe is rarer than it should be. After my first echocardiogram, he sat down across from me and explained what the imaging showed, a structural irregularity in one of my heart's valves that had likely been present for years, but had now progressed to the point of being clinically significant. Not immediately dangerous, requiring monitoring and medication and periodic reevaluation. I had been coming back to see Dr. Webb 4 times a year since then. The appointments had become, over 22 months, something close to routine in my relationship with the situation, not comfortable exactly, but known. I knew what to expect from the imaging, knew the questions he would ask, knew the numbers he was tracking, and approximately where they had been the last time. I had learned to interpret my own condition the way a person learns to interpret anything they live with for 2 years. Not without concern, but without the acute fear of early uncertainty. The appointment on the calendar 3 weeks out had felt like the others. I had not checked my messages that afternoon. What had happened in Dr. Webb's office that day, while I was driving through traffic and parking in the structure and taking the elevator to the 3rd floor, was this. At 2:17 in the afternoon, the cardiac imaging team had finalized the read on my echocardiogram from that morning. The findings were not what the previous 4 echoes had shown. The irregularity that Dr. Webb had been monitoring had progressed significantly in the interval since my last imaging, enough that his clinical assessment, formed within an hour of receiving the read, was that I should not leave the building after my appointment without a treatment discussion and likely a same-day procedure or immediate scheduling for one. He had flagged my chart at 2:45. The flag was a stat notation, the clinical designation for a patient who requires urgent management. In the hospital's registration system, a stat flag on a patient's chart generates an automatic alert that the patient should be registered and brought through regardless of standard cutoff protocols. The flag was visible to any registration staff member who pulled up my name. He had also attempted to reach me by phone at 2:50, 3:15, and 4 o'clock. My phone had been on silent since a 2 o'clock meeting that I had not remembered to exit from silent mode afterward. At 4:43, with 17 minutes before the registration window closed and no response from me and no confirmation that I was on my way in, Dr. Webb had asked his nurse coordinator to stay near the front desk and alert him the moment I arrived. His nurse coordinator had stepped away at 4:45 for a brief break. The registration nurse, who slammed the window at 4:51, had not pulled up my chart. She had seen the clock and made a decision based on the time. Dr. Webb had been standing in his office at 4:52, looking at his phone, considering whether to call the hospital's patient liaison about a missed critical appointment, when he heard the sound of the registration window being closed with force. He knew that sound. He came out of his office. He moved quickly down the hallway, the kind of movement that is technically controlled but is, in practical terms, fast enough to be alarming to anyone watching. He pushed through the door beside the registration window. He looked at the waiting area. He saw me standing at the closed window with my bag on my shoulder and my jacket still on. He stopped. The freeze lasted 3 seconds, as I described. He was, I would learn afterward, processing the specific combination of relief that I was physically present and had not left, alarm that I was on the wrong side of a closed registration window, and the particular adrenaline of a doctor who has been trying to reach a patient for 2 hours and has just found her. Then he turned to the nurse. He said her name. He said it in the measured, precise way of someone who is controlling their voice with deliberate effort. He said, "This patient's chart is flagged stat. That flag has been active since 2:45 this afternoon." He paused. A stat flag means registration is required regardless of cutoff time. That is not a guideline. That is a protocol. Another pause. Pull up her chart. The nurse pulled up my chart. She looked at the screen. I watched her face change. The stat notation was at the top of the chart, the first thing visible when a patient's record was accessed. It had been there for over 2 hours. It had been there when she had closed the window. She had not looked. Dr. Webb said 2 more sentences. The first, every staff member at this window is responsible for checking the chart before making a registration decision. That is why the system exists. The second, register this patient now, please. The nurse's hands, when she reached for the keyboard, were not steady. I was registered at 4:54. I was in Dr. Webb's office at 5:03. What followed was a conversation I will not detail in full because it is between me and my doctor, and because the medical specifics are not the heart of the story, though they are the heart of why I am telling it. What I will tell you is that Dr. Webb explained what the imaging had shown, what it meant in the context of my condition's progression, and what we were going to do about it. The plan required a procedure that was scheduled for the following morning. I was admitted that evening for monitoring. The procedure went well. I have seen Dr. Webb twice since then for follow-up. The numbers are stable. We are continuing to monitor. What I think about when I think about that afternoon is not primarily the nurse or the window or the sound of the glass sliding shut. I think about the 14 seconds I stood at that closed window before I heard the footsteps. I think about whatever it was that kept me there The accumulated decision to stay that I cannot fully explain beyond the fact that I made it. The moment when someone had told me to leave, and I had looked at the closed window, and simply stayed. I had not known, standing there, that my chart was flagged stat. I had not known that Dr. Webb had been trying to reach me for 2 hours. I had not known that the appointment I had driven to in ordinary afternoon traffic was not, in fact, an ordinary appointment. I had only known that I was in the right place, and that leaving did not feel like the right answer. I want to say something about medical protocols. They exist because people need to be protected in moments when they cannot protect themselves, when they do not know what they do not know, when the information that would change their behavior is held in a system they cannot access, when the urgency belongs to the chart rather than to the person carrying it. The stat flag on my chart existed because Dr. Webb had seen my imaging and understood what it meant. The protocol around that flag, the requirement to register regardless of cutoff, to check the chart before making a decision, existed because that information needed to reach me. It existed to bridge the gap between what a doctor knows and what a patient doesn't yet know they need to know. The nurse did not follow the protocol. I do not know everything about that choice, about her shift, about the end of a long day, about what she knew and didn't know about the system she was working in. I know only what I observed, which was a window closed without a chart being checked, and a protocol that was not followed, and a doctor who ran down a hallway. The protocol was the difference. Dr. Webb running was the difference. And 14 seconds of standing still was the difference. Stay at the window. Ask for the next person. The footsteps may already be coming.